The blood on Clara Fairchild's handkerchief was crimson against the white cotton, bright as the Arizona sunset bleeding across the horizon, and she shoved it deep into her skirt pocket before anyone in the dusty streets of Globe could see what her body was trying to tell her. She had traveled 1,500 miles from Pennsylvania to start fresh in this copper mining town nestled in the Pinal Mountains, and she would not let consumption steal this chance at her real life before she even had the opportunity to live it. The year was 1884, and Globe was a rough place, all wooden storefronts and mining operations, where fortune seekers and desperate souls mingled in equal measure. Clara had arrived 3 weeks prior with her meager savings and a letter of employment from the schoolhouse, ready to teach the children of miners and ranchers who needed education almost as much as they needed food. What the school board did not know was that the persistent cough that had started back east had worsened during her journey west, that some mornings she woke with her nightgown damp with fever sweat, that the exhaustion settling into her bones felt heavier than any fatigue she had ever known. But Clara was 22 years old and had spent her entire life being a burden to someone. Her parents had died when she was 12, leaving her to be shuttled between reluctant relatives who made sure she knew exactly how much her presence cost them. She had worked since she was old enough to hold a needle, sewing piecework by candlelight until her eyes burned, just to contribute to households that never quite felt like home. When the coughing started 6 months ago, when the doctor in Philadelphia had given her that pitying look and mentioned sanatoriums she could never afford, Clara had made a decision. She would go west, she would teach, and she would not burden another living soul with her failing health. If she was going to die, she would do it quietly, without asking anyone for help or care or pity. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple structure of pine boards with a bell tower that rang each morning to call the children in from the scattered ranches and mining camps. Clara loved it immediately, loved the way the light streamed through the windows in the afternoon, loved the sound of young voices reciting their lessons, loved the purpose that filled her days. She threw herself into teaching with a fierce dedication, preparing lessons late into the night, organizing the small library of books, learning the names and stories of each student who walked through her door. She had been in Globe for nearly a month when Thomas Oakes rode into her life on a bay gelding, his hat pulled low against the September sun, looking for his niece who had apparently decided school was less interesting than the creek behind the property. Clara was outside ringing the afternoon bell when she saw him approach, tall in the saddle with the easy posture of a man who spent more time on horseback than on foot. His face was tanned from years of outdoor work, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now as he dismounted and walked toward her with long strides. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried the hint of Texas in its vowels. "I am looking for my niece, Penny Oakes. She is supposed to be here for lessons, but her horse came back to the ranch without her about an hour ago." Clara felt her heart sink. Penny was a sweet 8-year-old with wild blonde curls and a tendency to daydream, and she had indeed been in class that morning. "She left with the other children when I dismissed them at noon," Clara said, her mind already racing through possibilities. "She seemed fine, perfectly healthy." "Did you check the creek? Some of the children mentioned going there after school." Thomas nodded, his jaw tight with worry. "That was going to be my next stop. Would you mind coming with me? You know her better than I do at this point." "I have only been back at the ranch for 2 weeks, and she might respond better to you if she is hiding or hurt." Clara should have said no. She should have explained that she had papers to grade, lessons to plan, that it was not appropriate for her to go riding off alone with a strange man. But the concern in his brown eyes was genuine, and she could not ignore the possibility that Penny might need help. "Let me lock the schoolhouse," she said. "I will come." She had not been on a horse since she was a child, and her body protested as Thomas helped her up behind him on the gelding. The contact of his hand on her arm, steadying her, sent a strange warmth through her that had nothing to do with fever. She held onto his waist as they rode toward the creek, trying to ignore how solid he felt beneath her hands, trying to focus on finding Penny, and not on the way her breath wanted to catch in her chest. They found the little girl sitting on a flat rock by the water, her bare feet dangling in the current, completely unaware of the panic she had caused. Her horse was grazing nearby, reins trailing on the ground. When she saw Thomas and Clara approaching, her face crumpled with immediate guilt. "Uncle Thomas, I am sorry," she said, tears already starting. "Buttercup stopped to drink and I got off to wade and then she just wandered away. I did not mean to make you worry." Thomas dismounted and went to his niece, kneeling beside her with a gentleness that surprised Clara. His voice was firm but not harsh. "Penny, you know better than to let your horse go. What if something had happened? What if you could not walk back? Your mother would never forgive me if you got hurt." "I know," Penny whispered. "I am really sorry." Clara slid down from the horse, her legs unsteady beneath her. The exertion of the ride had stirred something in her lungs, and she could feel the tickle starting in her throat. Not now, she thought desperately. Please, not now. She swallowed hard, forcing it down, focusing on Penny instead. "The important thing is you are safe," she said, keeping her voice calm. "But your uncle is right. The desert is not forgiving of mistakes, Penny. You must be more careful." Thomas caught Penny's horse and helped the girl back into the saddle, then turned to Clara. "Thank you for coming. I appreciate it more than you know." He studied her face for a moment, and Clara wondered what he saw there. Did he notice the pallor beneath her carefully pinned brown hair, the slight tremor in her hands that she could not quite control? "Can I offer you supper at the ranch as thanks? It is getting late, and the ride back to town in the dark is not safe." Clara knew she should decline. She could feel the cough building in her chest like a storm on the horizon, knew that the fever would probably come tonight, that she needed to be alone in her small room behind the schoolhouse, where no one could see her weakness. But Thomas Oakes was looking at her with those kind brown eyes, and Penny was nodding enthusiastically, and Clara was so tired of being alone. "That would be lovely," she heard herself say. "Thank you." The Oakes Ranch was a modest spread about 3 miles from town, with a main house built of adobe and timber, a barn that had seen better days, and corrals that held a small herd of cattle and horses. Thomas explained as they rode that the ranch belonged to his brother, who had died in a mining accident the previous year, leaving his wife Sarah and daughter Penny to manage the property. Thomas had been working cattle drives throughout Texas and New Mexico, but had come home to help his sister-in-law keep the place running. Sarah Oakes was a thin woman in her early 30s with the worn look of someone who had survived more grief than seemed fair. But her smile was genuine as she welcomed Clara into the simple kitchen, and her gratitude for Clara's help finding Penny was effusive. "That girl will be the death of me," Sarah said, though her hand on her daughter's shoulder was gentle. "Please, Miss Fairchild, sit. You look exhausted." The cough chose that moment to make itself known, forcing its way up Clara's throat before she could stop it. She grabbed her handkerchief, turning away quickly, feeling the familiar wet warmth that meant blood. When the spasm passed, she tucked the handkerchief away before anyone could see, forcing a smile. "I apologize. The dust here takes some getting used to." Thomas was watching her with a thoughtful expression that made Clara nervous, but he said nothing, only poured her a glass of water from the pitcher on the table. His fingers brushed hers as he handed it to her, and again Clara felt that strange flutter that had nothing to do with illness. Supper was simple but delicious. Beef stew with vegetables from Sarah's struggling garden, bread that was only slightly burned, coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. Clara tried to eat despite her lack of appetite, aware that Sarah was the type of woman who showed love through feeding people. Penny chattered about school, about the arithmetic problems she found confusing, about the story Clara had read that morning about ancient Rome. Thomas was quieter, but when he spoke, his words were thoughtful and often laced with gentle humor that made even Sarah smile. After supper, Thomas insisted on riding Clara back to town. "It is full dark now," he said, "and there are mountain lions in these hills. You cannot go alone." The ride back was quiet, with Clara seated behind Thomas again, her arms around his waist, her head resting against his back, because she was too tired to hold herself upright. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body through the cotton of his shirt, and for just a moment she let herself imagine what it would be like to have this, to have someone solid and steady to lean on. Then she remembered the blood on her handkerchief and pulled away slightly, creating distance, reminding herself that she was in no position to want anything from anyone. When they reached the schoolhouse, Thomas helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. In the moonlight, his face was half shadow, but his eyes were serious. "Miss Fairchild, Clara, if I may, are you well? You seem, forgive me, but you seem unwell." Clara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I am fine," she lied. "Just tired from the journey west. I will adjust to the climate soon enough." He looked like he wanted to say more, but he only nodded. "Thank you again for today. Penny thinks the world of you already." "She is a wonderful student," Clara said softly. "You are doing a good job with her." Something flickered in Thomas's expression, something almost vulnerable. "I am trying. I never expected to be responsible for raising a child. I am just a cowboy who knows horses and cattle and open sky. But she is all the family I have left, her and Sarah. So I am learning." Clara felt something shift in her chest, something that had nothing to do with consumption. "Family is not always about blood," she said. "Sometimes it is about who shows up when it matters. You showed up today. That is what counts." Thomas smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face, and Clara's heart did a traitorous flip. "Good night, Miss Fairchild," he said, tipping his hat. "Good night, Mr. Oakes." She watched him ride away into the darkness, then let herself into the schoolhouse, barely making it to her small room before the coughing started in earnest. She spent that night bent over a basin, handkerchief pressed to her mouth, tasting copper and fear. By morning, the handkerchief was rust-stained, and her body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. But she washed her face, pinned her hair with shaking hands, and rang the school bell at 8 o'clock sharp, because that was what she had come here to do. Over the following weeks, Thomas Oakes became a regular presence at the schoolhouse. He came to pick up Penny most afternoons, arriving early enough to lean against the fence and watch the last few minutes of lessons through the open door. Sometimes he brought Sarah along, and the two women struck up a tentative friendship, bonding over books and the challenges of life in a rough mining town. Sometimes Thomas came alone, and on those days he always found a reason to linger, to ask Clara questions about Penny's progress, to help her carry water from the well, to fix the broken step on the schoolhouse porch. Clara knew she should discourage his attention. She knew that every conversation, every shared smile, every moment of connection was a small cruelty, because it could lead nowhere. She was dying, slowly but certainly, and she would not trap any man, especially not this good man, into watching her waste away. But Thomas Oakes had a way of slipping past her defenses without even seeming to try. He was patient where other men might have pushed, gentle where others might have demanded, and his presence made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since she was a child in her mother's arms. The illness was getting worse. Clara could no longer hide the weight she was losing, the way her dresses hung looser on her frame despite Sarah's alterations. The coughs came more frequently, leaving her breathless and shaking. She started dismissing school early on her worst days, claiming errands in town while she actually retreated to her room to ride out the spasms in private. She dosed herself with the tonics the doctor in Globe reluctantly prescribed, though she knew they were doing little good. At night, she wrote letters to former students back east, trying to capture everything she wanted to say while she still had the strength to hold a pen. It was mid-October when Thomas finally confronted her. He had come to pick up Penny and found Clara outside the schoolhouse, doubled over behind the building, blood staining the ground at her feet. She looked up to find him staring at her with an expression of such alarm and hurt that she wanted to disappear into the earth. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough. "How long have you been this sick?" Clara straightened slowly, wiping her mouth with a handkerchief that was already ruined beyond saving. There was no point in lying anymore. "Since before I came to Globe," she said quietly. 6 months, maybe longer." Thomas took a step back, running his hand through his dark hair. "And you came out here alone to die, without telling anyone, without asking for help." "I came here to live," Clara said, and her voice was fiercer than she intended. "To teach and to be useful and to matter before I die. And I did not ask for help because I will not be a burden. I have been a burden my entire life, Thomas. I will not do it again." "A burden?" Thomas's voice rose, startling a crow from a nearby cottonwood. "Clara, you think taking care of someone who is sick makes them a burden. You think letting people care about you is some kind of imposition." "Yes," Clara said simply. "I know what I am worth, Thomas. I know what happens when you need too much, when you cost too much. People resent you. They count the expense of keeping you alive, and eventually they start wishing you would just hurry up and die so they can move on with their lives. I will not do that to anyone ever again." Thomas closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her want to weep. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "You could never be a burden to me, do you hear me? Never. I do not care if you are sick. I do not care if you need help. You matter, Clara, not because of what you can do or how useful you are, but because you are you. Because when you smile at Penny, she lights up like the sun. Because the way you talk about books makes me want to learn to read better just so I can understand what you see in them. Because when I am with you, I feel like maybe I could be more than just a cowboy passing through life without leaving a mark." Tears were sliding down Clara's cheeks, hot against his rough palms. "Thomas, I am dying. The doctor back east said consumption, said maybe a year if I was lucky. That was 6 months ago. You cannot want to sign up for that. You cannot want to watch someone fade away." "Then we will make the most of whatever time there is," Thomas said, and his own eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I lost my brother, Clara. I know how short life can be. I know that nothing is guaranteed. But I also know that I would rather have 6 months with you than a lifetime of wondering what I missed out on because I was too afraid to care." "I am afraid," Clara whispered. "I am so afraid of being too much, of needing too much, of hurting you when I go." "You let me worry about that," Thomas said. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, breathing in sync with her for a long moment. "I am asking you to let me help you, Clara, not because you are a burden, but because you deserve to be cared for. Because everyone deserves that, and you have been alone for far too long." Something in Clara cracked open. Some wall she had built brick by careful brick over years of being unwanted. She let herself lean into Thomas, let herself be held as the sobs came, as all the fear and loneliness and desperate hope poured out of her in great heaving gasps. He held her through all of it, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances that she was safe, that he had her, that she did not have to do this alone anymore. When the storm passed, Clara pulled back slightly, looking up at him through swollen eyes. "This is not fair to you," she said. "I cannot give you a future, Thomas. I cannot give you children or a partnership or anything that matters." "You matter," Thomas said firmly. "And we do not know what the future holds. Maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe the dry air here will help. Maybe we will have years instead of months. Or maybe we will only have a short time, but we will make it count. Either way, I am not walking away from you, Clara Fairchild. Not now, not ever." Clara searched his face, looking for any sign of pity or obligation, but all she saw was determination and something deeper, something that looked startlingly like love. "You are a stubborn man," she said, and it came out half laugh, half sob. "Yes," Thomas agreed, "and you are a stubborn woman. We should get along just fine." The kiss, when it came, was soft and careful, Thomas's lips gentle against hers as if she were something precious and fragile. Clara kissed him back with all the longing she had been trying to suppress, tasting salt from tears and something sweet she could not name. When they finally pulled apart, the Arizona sunset was painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and for the first time in months, Clara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to hope. Thomas insisted she see the doctor in Globe immediately, and Clara reluctantly agreed. Dr. Harrison was an older man who had practiced medicine in St. Louis before the lure of the frontier brought him west. He examined Clara thoroughly, listening to her lungs, taking her temperature, asking detailed questions about her symptoms and their progression. When he was finished, his expression was grave but not without compassion. "You have consumption, as I suspect you already know," he said. "Your lungs are compromised, though not as badly as they could be. The dry climate here is actually helpful for some consumptives. It is why we get so many people coming west for the air." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I cannot promise you a cure, Miss Fairchild. Consumption is a serious illness and it can progress unpredictably. But I have seen patients stabilize out here, seen them live for years with proper care and rest. You are young and you have been fighting this alone, which has undoubtedly made things worse. With help with proper nutrition and rest, you might have more time than you think." "How much time?" Clara asked, her hand finding Thomas's where he stood beside her chair. "I honestly cannot say," Dr. Harrison admitted. "Months, certainly, perhaps years. The human body is surprisingly resilient and the will to live counts for more than most doctors want to admit." Thomas's grip on her hand tightened. "What does she need? What can we do?" Dr. Harrison began listing recommendations. "Rest as much as possible. Good food, plenty of it, with an emphasis on red meat and fresh milk. Tonics to help with the coughing and the night sweats. Most importantly, she needed to stop pushing herself so hard, stop pretending she was well when she was not." "I need to teach," Clara protested. "The children need their lessons and I need to work to support myself." "The children need their teacher alive," Thomas said firmly. "Clara, please. Let us help you." The argument that followed lasted through the walk back to the schoolhouse and into the evening. Clara insisted she could not just stop teaching, that she needed her independence, that she would not impose on Thomas and Sarah. Thomas countered every objection with calm determination, pointing out that she could tutor Penny and the other children part-time from the ranch, that Sarah needed help with the household management and would welcome her presence, that this was not charity but practical sense. "Marry me," Thomas said suddenly, the words falling into the space between them like stones into a still pond. Clara stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Marry me," Thomas repeated, and now he was kneeling in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Not out of pity, not out of obligation. Marry me because I have been falling in love with you since the day I met you, and I do not want to waste a single moment of whatever time we have. Marry me because you deserve to have someone stand beside you, because you deserve to be cherished and cared for and loved. Marry me because when I think about my future, all I can see is you." "Thomas, you barely know me," Clara whispered, but her heart was racing. "I know enough," Thomas said. "I know you are brave and kind and dedicated. I know you love teaching and you read poetry when you think no one is watching. I know you try to carry the whole world on your shoulders because you think you have to earn the right to exist. I know I want to spend the rest of my life, however long that is, convincing you that you are worth loving just as you are." Clara felt tears spilling down her cheeks again. Everything in her that was cautious and self-protective screamed that this was too fast, too risky, that she would hurt him too much when the end came. But another part of her, the part that had been so lonely for so long, wanted this with a fierce desperation that took her breath away. "I do not want you to have regrets," she said. "I do not want you to look back on this and wish you had chosen differently." "The only thing I would regret is letting you face this alone," Thomas said. "Say yes, Clara. Please say yes." She looked into his brown eyes, so earnest and full of hope, and felt something in her chest that was not illness but rather its opposite. Joy, possibility, love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." The kiss this time was less careful, more urgent, Thomas pulling her into his arms as if he could keep her safe through sheer determination. Clara kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her gratitude and fear and tentative hope into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas was smiling like the sun breaking through clouds. "We will do this right," he promised. "We will get married in the church with Sarah and Penny there, with the whole town invited if you want, and then we will face whatever comes together." They were married 2 weeks later in the small Catholic church in Globe, with Father Miguel presiding and half the town crowding into the pews to witness the union. Clara wore a simple dress that Sarah had helped her sew, pale blue calico with lace at the collar, and carried wildflowers that Penny had picked that morning. Thomas wore his best clothes, his dark hair slicked back, his face so full of love and pride that Clara felt her breath catch every time she looked at him. Sarah stood as Clara's witness, squeezing her hand reassuringly when it was time to speak her vows. Penny served as flower girl, taking her job with utmost seriousness as she scattered petals down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when Thomas slipped the simple gold band onto Clara's finger and kissed her as his wife, Clara felt something she had not felt in years. She felt like she belonged. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and music and well wishes. Clara grew tired quickly, the excitement and emotion draining her limited reserves, but Thomas stayed close, making sure she had a chair, bringing her water and food, running interference when people got too enthusiastic. Sarah watched them with a soft smile, clearly pleased to see her brother-in-law so happy. As the sun began to set and the guests started to depart, Thomas helped Clara into the main house, into the bedroom that was now theirs. He had cleaned it out carefully, added feminine touches like curtains and a rug, made space in the wardrobe for her limited possessions. "Welcome home," he said softly, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes because she had not had a real home in so very long. That night, Thomas was gentle and patient, treating Clara like something precious as they came together as husband and wife. He mapped her body with careful hands, kissing every inch of skin he uncovered, murmuring words of love and devotion until Clara was breathless with wanting. When they finally joined, it was with a tenderness that made Clara's heart ache, a connection that felt sacred in its intensity. Afterward, Thomas held her close, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her hair as her breathing evened out into sleep. The following months were some of the happiest of Clara's life, despite the ongoing illness. She settled into life at the ranch, helping Sarah with household tasks when she had the energy, tutoring Penny and several other local children in the mornings, spending her afternoons resting as doctor. Harrison had ordered. Thomas was attentive without being smothering, learning to read the signs of her good days and bad days, adjusting their routine accordingly. On her good days, Clara felt almost normal. She would walk with Thomas around the property, learning about the cattle and horses, listening to his stories about his years driving herds across Texas. He taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance until she could hit a target at 20 yards. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. Thomas was surprisingly well-read for a cowboy, having spent long nights on cattle drives working his way through whatever books he could find. And he loved when Clara read poetry aloud to him, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. On her bad days, when the coughing was relentless and the fever made her shiver despite the blankets piled high, Thomas never wavered. He would sit beside the bed for hours, reading to her when she could not manage it herself, bringing cool cloths for her forehead, holding her when the night terrors came. He never complained, never showed impatience or frustration, never made her feel like the burden she had always feared becoming. "How do you do it?" Clara asked him one night after a particularly bad episode. "How do you stay so patient? I know this is not what you signed up for." Thomas set aside the book he had been reading and moved to sit on the edge of the bed, taking her hand in his. "Clara, this is exactly what I signed up for. I married you for better or worse, in sickness and in health. Those are not just words. This is what love looks like. It is not always romantic sunsets and poetry. Sometimes it is holding someone's hand through the hard parts, being there when things are ugly and difficult, choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave." "But do you ever regret it?" Clara pressed, needing to hear the truth. "Do you ever wish you had married someone healthy, someone who could give you children and grow old with you?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "I will not lie and say I do not wish you were healthy. I hate seeing you suffer, hate feeling helpless to fix it. But regret marrying you? Never. Not for a single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara. You make me want to be a better man. You make this ranch feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. You brought light into my life, and I am grateful for every single day I get with you, good or bad." Clara felt tears sliding down her temples into her hair. "I love you so much," she whispered. "I did not think I was capable of this, of letting someone in this deeply. But you make me feel safe enough to try." "That is all I ever wanted," Thomas said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Now sleep, my love. Tomorrow is a new day, and I will be right here beside you when you wake." Winter came to Globe, bringing cooler temperatures that were easier on Clara's beleaguered lungs. She found herself with more good days than bad, enough that she was able to expand her tutoring schedule and even help Sarah with the Christmas preparations. Thomas cut down a small juniper tree, and they decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments that Penny made, filling the house with the scent of evergreen and cinnamon. On Christmas morning, Thomas gave Clara a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "I know you like to write," he said, almost shyly. "I thought maybe you could use this for your stories and poems." Clara ran her fingers over the smooth leather, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. She had given Thomas a new hat, practical and simple, but he wore it with such pride that she knew he valued it. Penny received a new doll and books from both Clara and Thomas, and Sarah opened a warm shawl that Clara had knitted during her rest periods, each stitch infused with gratitude for the older woman's friendship. They attended Christmas Mass in town, the church glowing with candlelight and filled with voices raised in hymns. Clara sat between Thomas and Sarah, Penny on Thomas's other side, and felt surrounded by family in a way she had never experienced before. These people loved her, accepted her, wanted her there. It was a gift more precious than anything that could be wrapped in paper. As 1884 turned into 1885, Clara's health remained relatively stable. The coughing persisted, and she still had bad spells that left her weak and exhausted, but the worst of the hemorrhaging had stopped. Dr. Harrison cautiously suggested that the climate was indeed helping, that with continued care she might defy the original prognosis. Clara did not let herself hope too much, but she could not deny that she felt stronger than she had in months, that the future no longer seemed quite so foreshortened. In February, Sarah began courting the new assayer who had arrived in town to work for one of the mining companies. His name was William Chen, the son of a Chinese immigrant father and Irish mother, and he was educated and kind and clearly smitten with the widow. Clara and Thomas both encouraged the relationship, happy to see Sarah opening her heart again after years of grief. Penny was more cautious, protective of her mother, but William won her over with patience and by genuinely listening when she talked about her schoolwork and interests. By spring, the ranch was thriving under Thomas's management. He had bought several new head of cattle and expanded the grazing range, and the horses he bred were gaining a reputation for quality throughout the territory. Clara started a small vegetable garden, working the soil with Sarah, planting seeds and watching with delight as green shoots began to push through the earth. There was something deeply satisfying about nurturing life, about creating something that would grow and flourish. One warm April evening, Clara and Thomas rode out to a meadow about a mile from the ranch house, a place where wildflowers bloomed in riotous profusion, and the sound of the creek provided a constant gentle murmur. They spread a blanket and lay side by side, watching clouds drift across the endless Arizona sky. "I have been thinking," Thomas said, his hand finding Clara's and lacing their fingers together, "about the future, about what we want to build together." Clara turned her head to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. "What have you been thinking?" "I want to expand the ranch, make it something substantial that we can pass down. I want to add onto the house, create more space. Maybe eventually build a separate cottage for Sarah and William if they get married." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "And I want to talk about children, if you want them, if you think it is possible." Clara's breath caught. They had been careful to avoid pregnancy, assuming that carrying a child would be too dangerous given her condition. But the longing in Thomas's voice was unmistakable, and Clara realized with a start that she wanted it too, wanted to create a life with this man she loved, wanted to leave something of themselves behind. "I do not know if I can," Clara said softly. "Doctor Harrison never said it was impossible, but it would be risky. I do not know if my body could handle it." "Then we will ask him," Thomas said, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "We will get his honest opinion, and if he says it is too dangerous, then that is okay." We have Penny, and we can fill this house with love and laughter without children of our own. But if there is a chance, if it is something you want, then I think we should try." Clara reached up to cup his face, feeling the slight rasp of stubble against her palm. "I want it," she admitted. "I want to have your child, Thomas. I want to create something beautiful together, something that lasts." They made an appointment with Dr. Harrison the following week, sitting nervously in his office as he reviewed Clara's recent health history. The doctor was thoughtful, taking his time before he spoke. "Your lungs have stabilized considerably over the past 6 months," he said finally. "The hemorrhaging has largely stopped, and your weight is better than when I first examined you. I would not have recommended pregnancy then, but now I think it might be possible." "What are the risks?" Thomas asked, his hand tight around Clara's. "Pregnancy puts additional strain on the body, particularly the heart and lungs," Dr. Harrison said honestly. "For Clara, that strain could potentially exacerbate the consumption. There is also the risk of hemorrhage during childbirth, and recovery would likely be harder for her than for a healthy woman. That said, I have seen consumptive women successfully carry and deliver children. It is not impossible, just higher risk." "What would you recommend?" Clara asked, trying to keep the hope out of her voice. Dr. Harrison smiled slightly. "I would recommend that if this is something you both truly want, you proceed carefully, monitor your health closely. At the first sign of serious complications, we would need to intervene. And you would need to rest even more during the pregnancy, minimize physical exertion, let others take care of you. Can you do that?" Clara looked at Thomas, seeing her own cautious hope reflected in his eyes. "Yes," she said. "I can do that." They rode home in contemplative silence, both processing the possibilities and risks. That night, wrapped in Thomas's arms, Clara felt a spark of something she had not allowed herself in so long. She felt like the future was not just something to survive, but something to actively build, brick by careful brick. It took 3 months for Clara to conceive. 3 months of trying and hoping and occasionally despairing. When her monthly courses finally failed to arrive, and the telltale nausea began, Clara could hardly believe it. Dr. Harrison confirmed the pregnancy in July, warning them again about the need for caution and rest. Thomas became almost overprotective, insisting Clara stop tutoring entirely, hovering whenever she so much as stood up too quickly. "Thomas, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Clara protested after he stopped her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I need to be able to do some things." "I know," Thomas said, looking sheepish. "I am sorry. I am just scared, Clara. Scared of losing you, scared of something going wrong. I do not know how to not worry." Clara softened, reaching up to kiss him gently. "I am scared too," she admitted, "but we have to have faith. We have to believe this will work out." The pregnancy was not easy. The nausea persisted well into the 4th month, and Clara's body seemed to struggle with the additional demands. She lost weight initially, worrying Dr. Harrison enough that he prescribed additional tonics and mandated complete bed rest for 2 weeks. The coughing continued, sometimes worse than before, and there were nights when Clara woke gasping for air, terrified that her body would fail both her and the baby. But there were also moments of pure joy. The first time Clara felt the baby move, a flutter like butterfly wings against the inside of her womb, she wept with happiness. Thomas took to talking to her belly in the evenings, telling the baby stories about the ranch and the family waiting to meet them. Penny was thrilled at the prospect of a cousin, already planning all the things she would teach the baby. Sarah and William, who had gotten engaged in August, fussed over Clara with gentle dedication. As autumn arrived and Clara entered her 3rd trimester, her health actually seemed to improve slightly. The nausea faded, Her appetite returned, and while she was easily exhausted, the coughing fits became less frequent. Dr. Harrison cautiously optimistic, suggesting that sometimes pregnancy hormones could temporarily suppress consumption symptoms. He warned them not to become complacent, but Clara could not help feeling hopeful. She spent her days resting on the porch, writing in the journal Thomas had given her, documenting her thoughts and feelings for the child she was carrying. She wanted them to know how wanted they were, how loved, how their very existence was a miracle she had never expected to receive. She wrote about Thomas, about his kindness and strength, about the way he had saved her not by fixing her illness but by loving her despite it. She wrote about the ranch, about the mountains and the endless sky, about the life they were building together in this wild, beautiful place. On a cold January morning in 1886, Clara's water broke while she was helping Sarah with breakfast. The labor came on fast and hard, making up for the relatively easy pregnancy with brutal intensity. Dr. Harrison arrived within the hour, bringing his medical bag and a stern expression. Thomas was not allowed in the birthing room, but Clara could hear him pacing in the hallway, could hear his voice raised in prayer. The labor lasted 14 hours, and there were moments when Clara thought she would not survive it. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, great tearing waves that left her screaming and begging for it to stop. Dr. Harrison's face grew increasingly grim as her bleeding increased, as her exhausted body struggled to complete the final stages. Sarah held her hand throughout, murmuring encouragements, wiping her face with cool cloths. Just when Clara thought she had nothing left to give, when the darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision, Dr. Harrison commanded her to push one final time. Clara bore down with every ounce of strength remaining, and suddenly there was a release, a sliding sensation, and then the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. A baby crying, loud and indignant and alive. "A boy," Dr. Harrison announced, and Clara could hear the relief in his voice. "You have a son, Clara." They placed the baby on her chest, still covered in blood and vernix, his face red and scrunched with fury. Clara looked down at him in wonder, at his tiny perfect fingers and the shock of dark hair plastered to his skull, and felt a love so fierce it stole what little breath she had remaining. "Thomas," she whispered. "Let Thomas in." The door burst open and Thomas rushed in, his face pale and eyes red-rimmed. When he saw Clara holding their son, saw them both alive, he made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He knelt beside the bed, one hand touching the baby's head with infinite gentleness, the other taking Clara's hand. "You did it," he said, his voice breaking. "You did it, my love. He is perfect." "We need to name him," Clara said, her voice weak but happy. They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, unable to agree on the perfect choice. Thomas looked at his son, at the way the baby was already quieting in his mother's arms, and something seemed to settle in his expression. "Theodore," he said. "Theodore James Oakes. We can call him Theo." Clara tested the name silently, watching the baby's eyes flutter open to reveal blue depths that would likely change color in the coming months. "Theodore James," she repeated. "It is perfect, Doctor." Harrison insisted Clara stay in bed for at least 2 weeks following the birth, monitoring her carefully for infection or hemorrhage. The delivery had taken a significant toll on her body, and there were days when Clara could do nothing but sleep, too exhausted even to nurse Theo for long. Sarah took over much of the baby's care during those first difficult weeks, supplementing Clara's milk with goat's milk when necessary, changing diapers and walking the floor when Theo fussed. Thomas barely left Clara's side, sleeping in a chair beside the bed, helping her to the necessary, bringing her food and water and medicine. He changed diapers with surprising competence for a man who had never handled a baby before, and he rocked Theo to sleep while singing cowboy ballads in his rough voice. Watching him with their son, Clara fell in love with him all over again. Slowly, painfully, Clara began to recover. By February, she was able to sit up for longer periods, to hold Theo without feeling like her arms would give out, to walk around the bedroom with help. By March, she could manage short trips to the main room of the house, sitting in the rocking chair by the fireplace while Sarah cooked and Penny played with Theo on a blanket on the floor. Spring brought renewed energy, and Clara began to believe that she had truly survived, that the doctors had been wrong about her timeline. Theo was a happy baby, quick to smile and easy to soothe, fascinated by everything around him. He adored his father, his whole face lighting up whenever Thomas came into view. As he grew, his resemblance to Thomas became more pronounced, the same dark hair and brown eyes, the same easy temperament. But he had Clara's smile, sweet and a little shy, and her love of quiet observation. Sarah and William were married in April, a simple ceremony followed by a reception at the ranch. They moved into a small house in town, where William's work at the mining company was based, but they visited the ranch frequently. Penny, now 11, had become an indispensable helper with Theo, doting on him like the little brother she had always wanted. She was growing into a confident, intelligent young woman, excelling in her studies and talking about becoming a teacher herself someday. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following years. Clara's health remained fragile but stable, with good stretches interrupted by occasional bad spells that required rest and medical attention. Dr. Harrison continued to monitor her closely, adjusting her medications as needed, but he admitted that she had far exceeded his initial expectations. The consumption had not gone away, but it had been managed, contained, transformed from an immediate death sentence into a chronic condition she could live with. Thomas expanded the ranch steadily, hiring additional help as the herd grew, building relationships with buyers throughout the territory. The ranch became known for producing quality cattle and excellent horses, and the income allowed them to improve the property significantly. They added rooms to the main house, built a better barn, dug a proper well. Clara started a small library, collecting books and making them available to neighboring families who had little access to reading material. Theo grew into a bright, curious child who followed his father everywhere, mimicking his walk, asking endless questions about the horses and cattle. By the time he was 4, he could ride a gentle mare by himself, sitting tall in the saddle with unconscious pride. He adored stories, sitting rapt while Clara read to him in the evenings, and he had inherited both parents' love of the natural world, collecting interesting rocks and watching birds with intense focus. In the summer of 1890, Clara discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise that left both her and Thomas simultaneously thrilled and terrified. She was now 28, and the years of illness had taken their toll even as the consumption remained relatively controlled. Dr. Harrison was more cautious this time, warning that the risks would be higher with Clara's weakened lungs and the lingering effects of the difficult first pregnancy. "I want to try," Clara said firmly, when Dr. Harrison laid out all the potential complications. "I know the risks, but I also know that I want this. I want Theo to have a sibling. I want to give Thomas another child. And I want to prove one more time that I am stronger than this disease." The pregnancy was harder than the first, with Clara confined to bed rest for much of it. The consumption flared at times, the coughing fits more severe, the exhaustion more profound. There were moments when Clara doubted her decision, when she wondered if she was being selfish, risking her life and leaving Theo motherless for the chance at another child. But Thomas never wavered in his support, never suggested she had made the wrong choice, and that faith sustained her through the darkest days. Their daughter was born in March of 1891, arriving 2 weeks early during a late-season snowstorm that nearly prevented Dr. Harrison from reaching the ranch. The labor was mercifully shorter than Theo's had been, though no less intense, and when Clara heard the baby's first cry, she wept with relief and joy. Thomas was beside her this time, having refused to be sent away, and the look on his face when he saw his daughter was something Clara knew she would remember forever. "What should we name her?" Clara asked, cradling the tiny girl against her chest. She was smaller than Theo had been, more delicate, with a cap of light brown hair and eyes that would eventually turn green like Clara's. Thomas stroked one finger down their daughter's cheek, his expression soft. "Catherine," he said. "After your mother, Catherine Rose Oakes." Clara felt tears spill over, touched beyond words that Thomas would honor the mother she had lost so long ago. "Catherine Rose," she whispered, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead. "Welcome to the world, little one." Recovery from Catherine's birth was slower than from Theo's, with complications that kept Clara bedridden for nearly a month. There was infection initially, bringing fever and delirium, and Dr. Harrison had to lance and drain the wound to prevent sepsis. Clara's lungs worsened under the stress, the coughing fits bringing blood more frequently, and there were nights when everyone feared she would not survive until morning. But Clara was a fighter, had always been a fighter, and she refused to surrender. She clung to life with grim determination, focusing on her children, on Thomas, on all the reasons she had to keep going. Slowly, painfully, she began to improve. By April, she could sit up without assistance. By May, she could walk with help. By June, she could hold Catherine and Theo together, one child in each arm, and feel like perhaps the worst was truly behind her. Catherine was a fussier baby than Theo had been, quick to cry and particular about being held, but she had a smile that transformed her whole face, and a stubborn independence that showed even in infancy. Theo was enchanted with his little sister, constantly wanting to hold her and show her things, his gentle care of her revealing a tenderness that made Clara's heart swell. The years that followed were not without challenges. Clara's health continued to be unpredictable, with good months,